1979 was the year that changed everything, and the year that everything changed. Everywhere it seemed, from Nicaragua to Zimbabwe, the old order was under siege from determined revolutionaries. And even here in Scotland, the football establishment reacted with fury to the threat that swept out of the north in 1979.
There was a mass riot. This was Scotland in its sectarian worst.
But in the back of their minds, they would have known that this is maybe the beginning of the end for us.
As never before, the dominant position of Celtic and Rangers was under threat. Between them, they'd won every championship since 1965, and they'd won 24 of the previous 26 Scottish Cups.
Enter Alec Ferguson at Aberdeen and Jim McLean at Dundee United to really revolutionise Scottish football.
The temperament in the team is terrific. They couldn't wait to get on that pitch.
Our priorities at that time was just football.
All Ferguson and McLean had on their side was a bucket load of self-belief and the spirit of the times.
What a majestic setting for this match today. The weather absolutely superb. And a huge support has come down from Pittodrie for this game. But of course, it's not the attraction of Edinburgh and the weather. It's a possibility of Aberdeen winning the championship this very day.
After 35 league matches, it all came down to one final 90 minutes in the Edinburgh sunshine. A win over Hibernian, and Alex Ferguson's Aberdeen will be crowned champions of Scotland for the first time in 25 years.
When you bring it back down to that thing that we all know and love called Scottish football, the only real way that you can think about a revolution in the New World Order is if somebody somewhere suggests a fundamental challenge to that most bastion-like institution of all, the Old Firm. And of course, it happened, and it happened in the most magical ways that you could imagine.
Back in 1979, there was nothing to suggest a revolution was just around the corner, especially not from Aberdeen Football Club. Back then, Scotland was still wounded from the Argentina World Cup experience and bewildered by the debacle of the first devolution referendum. And anyway, you couldn't be a real revolutionary wearing gear like this. Also, hadn't Aberdeen already missed their opportunity to land St Mirren manager Alex Ferguson 2 years earlier?
Alan McLeod was manager of Aberdeen, and he phoned me and he says, look, the Aberdeen job is yours if you want it. I said to Ali, I says, look, I'm trying to build an Aberdeen here.
Sideways and a great shot and a great goal. Billy Stark scores a cracker.
He says, I'll never do that. Aberdeen's a great club, you should really take this job. And I decided to stay at St Mirren.
Aberdeen instead turned to ex-Celtic captain Billy McNeill. McNeill's stay was brief, only 12 months, but he made an immediate impact. In his only season at Pittodrie, his team finished runners-up in both the league and the Scottish Cup.
Graham, a chance for Jarvie, and a goal!
I think the contribution that Billy McNeill made to Aberdeen Football Club could never be understated. He put in place the building blocks for Alec Ferguson, the foundation stone, if you like, on which Alec Ferguson could build this fabulous team.
Following McNeill's departure to Celtic, Aberdeen chairman Dick Donald went back to the man who'd rejected them a year before. And they picked their moment well.
I was having a dispute with St Mirren at the time, and they decided to sack me for a million reasons. Nothing to do with football. It just the chairman at St Mirren he wanted to run the show, and of course I opposed all that. And when you're young, you fight anything, you know. And that was the end of that relationship. Aberdeen came that night when I left St Mirren. I met them the next day, accepted the job. That was the great part for me. There was nothing complicated about it, you know.
So when in 1978 Alex Ferguson left St Mirren to become Aberdeen's 5th manager of the decade, he took his new players down to the local public park to get to know them better.
Hold it there. One big man, do you get that thigh in the chest?
Unfortunately, some of them didn't want to get to know him.
You get the impression that he just wandered in there and waved the wand about and things changed overnight. It wasn't like that at all.
Ferguson came in and made it absolutely clear from the off. He was the boss. What he said would go. There would be no discussion about anything. They followed orders. They followed instructions.
When he took over there was a lot of players there who he'd actually played against. Players who maybe had conflict with him on the park. And I think there was a wee bit, in my opinion, there was a wee bit of resentment towards him at times.
Alec kept comparing one or two of our players to some St Mirren players and people at Willie Miller who are, pretty tough guys and guys with strong belief in themselves. They took a bit of umbrage at that.
One or two little issues in the fact that he kind of used St Mirren as his kind of a benchmark, which certainly got on my nose. And, when he was setting things up, he would say, like, this is the way we used to do it at St Mirren, or Jackie Copeland, who was his captain at that time, this is the way Jackie used to do it. It got to the stage where I says, I don't really care how St Mirren did it, or how Jackie Copeland did it, this is how I want to do it.
So don't be afraid to use the player in the byline. You've got to try and draw him towards you.
I think where the problem with a lot of the players had at the start would be the demands that Alec was expecting of them. I think one or two of them weren't quite up to it.
Dick Donald was a marvellous chairman, but Donald probably didn't realise what he was getting into when he hired Ferguson, because here was a young man who was determined to show that he was going to be a special manager.
Ferguson was driven to succeed by a massive self-belief, fuelled by an equally massive sense of injustice. As a player, he felt he'd been badly treated by Rangers and forced to shoulder the blame for the 1969 Scottish Cup defeat by Celtic. While his sacking by St Mirren after getting them promoted to the Premier Division still gnawed away at him.
He'd been given this second chance by Aberdeen, and I think he wanted to show the directors at St Mirren Football Club, you've made a big mistake. I could have made your club a great club. Now I'm going to make Aberdeen a great club, and put that in your pipe and smoke it.
One big forward. The defending two tries, split the three. Don't go mark two and leave one. Try to set yourself in between the three players.
So while Ferguson was getting his message across at Aberdeen, just 70 miles down the east coast, a similarly dominant personality with a similar sense of injustice was beginning to emerge at Dundee United.
He really could use a goal at this stage in the game. Payne going up and a great chance for Sturrock, and it must be a goal, and it is. Paul Sturrock, the sub.
I just wanted to win. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Unfortunately, I didn't win as often as I wanted to win, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be, in my opinion, a good loser. Show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser as a statement, and I feel a wee bit like that.
McLean had previously been a coach at city rivals Dundee. He left Dens Park having been overlooked for the manager's job at Dundee and crossed the road to Tannadice to become United boss in 1971. At that time, anyone leaving Dens Park for Tannadice was seen as taking a backward step.
Dundee United were actually, by some distance, the small club in Dundee. You might even say the irrelevant club in Dundee. And because here, opposite them at Dens Park, was this colossus, this great institution of a club.
When the Premier League was proposed, the chairman of Hibs, Tom Hart, had me in the boardroom once and he said, look, we don't want Dundee United in this league. They're hopeless, small support, they won't do anything significant in Scottish football.
But to someone as ambitious and single-minded as the young Jim McLean, size didn't matter.
To be completely honest, it's selfish, but all I wanted to be was successful as a manager, and at the end of the day it was a great opportunity.
Cameron with a chance, and it's a goal. Kenny Cameron scores.
Jim McLean wanted to show Dundee Football Club that they'd made a huge mistake, that they should have appointed him, and that he was better than anybody they could have appointed. So I think, in many ways, he was driven to show the directors of Dundee Football Club they'd made a big mistake.
Mrs. Robinson.
To make United the top club in the city of Dundee would be something to boast about. To make them any more than that would be absolutely astonishing.
Beautiful chance for United and a beautiful goal by George Fleming.
But McLean had a plan, a long-term plan, involving youth and iron discipline.
Jim was a great judge of young players, and in a sense he was a kind of Gene Brodie of football. Give me a player young at an impressionable age and he's mine for life, you know. He loved working with young players. He was a terrific judge of young players, not only of their abilities but what they could become.
I used to love going and watching Dundee United's reserve side in the mid-70s once Jim took over, because you saw these kids all coming through the ranks and they were so entertaining.
His tactics and his training and his coaching methods were brilliant. One time we had a practice match in the morning against the reserves and we lost in the morning, so he had us back in the afternoon. We lost in the afternoon and he had us back at night, so we had 3 games that day until he got it right. So that was the type of manager he was.
He knew where he was wanting to go in football. You know, he always said, you know, I'm going to do this, and if I'm going to be a failure, it'll be my way. And it was like, I'll do it my way, sort of thing, like, you know.
Addison.
He did it his way, and over the decade, McLean assembled a squad of players that had become, by some distance, the dominant team in the city of Dundee. There was a feeling by the late 70s that far away in the northeast of the country, and therefore under the radar of the west of Scotland media, things were changing. Fans in Aberdeen and Dundee believed that Ferguson and McLean were building teams capable of taking on and beating the Goliaths of Scottish football. But as fate would have it, before they could do that, Aberdeen and United would have to travel to Glasgow themselves to try to put one over each other in the final of the League Cup. Unlike vast tracts of the west of Scotland in 1979, the northeast was enjoying an economic boom, and the region was attracting huge levels of foreign investment.
North Sea oil was being excavated, all sorts of offshore activity was being invented and pioneered, and suddenly and profoundly Aberdeen became one of Scotland's most powerful, richest and most significant cities.
And as their economy grew in significance, so too did the football teams of the northeast.
Strachan right through, there is no flag. Strachan sticks it and scores.
In the late 1970s, Aberdeen and Dundee United began to emerge as serious players in the Scottish game.
Milne with a great shot, oh what a goal!
Thanks entirely to 2 football-obsessed individuals.
Well, the first time I met Alec, the both of us were down at Lars getting their final coach badge, and unfortunately I got him as my roommate. He actually told me he'd got married just the previous day, and it shows you the type of person and how stupid both he and I are, that our priorities at that time was just football.
The similarities between McLean and Ferguson are pretty easy to look at in terms of they both were extremely driven. They wanted to show that they were coaches and managers to be reckoned with.
There was no question whatsoever that they helped one another and aided one another, and they more or less sought the assistance of one another.
I know there were lots of times when they were on the phone constantly for long, long spells discussing how they were going to overturn the old firm dominance of Scottish football.
Aberdeen in particular had made a start, knocking out both Celtic and Rangers en route to the League Cup final, where they'd meet Dundee United, the other half of what the media had unimaginatively dubbed the new firm. For the winner, be it Ferguson or McLean, this would be the first silverware of his career as either player or manager, and in all likelihood, this would be their first and only chance of success that season. United and Aberdeen had had a dress rehearsal at Pittodrie in the league the month before.
That is it. Going wide.
And the omens weren't good for Alex Ferguson's side.
Deflected in, and United are 2 up.
Questions were being asked if Ferguson's team had the bottle to win the big matches.
Payne giving him it back, and Bannon, oh, what a goal!
Now, you've been in 3 cup finals in the last 2 seasons. This is a very important one for you because, in a sense, you've got to prove that you're winners and not just losers all the time.
Well, irrespective of what happens on Saturday, I'm still convinced we are winners. I think we will win the cup on Saturday. I think they're good enough.
Well, time now for our look at Scotland, where all eyes today are on Hampden Park for the League Cup final between Dundee United and Aberdeen.
Just blocked it back to Scanlon. Scanlon trying to wriggle his way through, but as he waited too long, McAlpin just eventually falling on the ball.
I think it was, being honest with you, I think it was a crap game, being honest with you, like, you know.
Coming up towards the end of the extra time.
But what chances there were fell to Aberdeen.
Driven in by Miller and just wide.
In the first game against Aberdeen, they deserved to beat us. We didn't play well at Hampden.
I'm sure he wasn't happy with our performance because we didn't play particularly well that day. And as I say, Aberdeen were probably disappointed in coming away Hampden with a League Cup.
That largely forgettable 0-0 draw meant a hastily rearranged replay at Dens Park. As the Scottish League broke out the letter set to design the match programme, the Dundee ground staff made sure that at least the pitch would be fit for a National Cup final. For United, this was almost a home tie, and Jim McLean treated it as such.
My recollection is that they actually get changed at Tannadice. You know, they didn't use the facilities at Dens. Did all their warm-up and all their build-up over at their own ground, obviously making them feel at home.
To be fair to wee Jim, he'd probably asked the players, he said, would you rather do that? And probably just being familiar with our own surroundings, we just did that and trotted over.
I think both teams were happier playing it at Dens. They would have been happier in the first game playing it at Dens. Neutral ground, OK, brilliant for the fans. For United, you're only going to cross the road.
Kick-off slightly delayed to let the crowd in.
The replay was fantastic atmosphere. It was absolutely filled with emotion. That was a great night, Dens Park.
I remember there was a great atmosphere. I think it was a wet night. It was kind of great for playing football. The surface had a bit of a skid in it, and I remember we played well.
Kirkwood is still down, but that's a good ball to Pettigrew. Still a chance. He scored.
They came out and they took us on in the very early stages, and we never recovered from that, and we're kind of blown away. So whatever we did, it didn't work.
The replay at Dens Park, they swept us aside. They forgot to have any nerves that they did in the previous Saturday.
Fleming is inside, that's very good at it!
And I think Sturrock and Dodds and Co were in sparkling form that night.
Pettigrew's inside and he's on the clear.
United
3-0.
United excelled themselves in the replay. It was the best they played all season that night.
And there it goes, the final whistle. United have won the Scottish League Cup.
They thoroughly deserved it, no question about it. A 3-0 scoreline speaks for itself. On the night, they were outstanding.
And Paul Hegarty lifts the League Cup.
Oh, we were very low-key with our celebrations because Jim was so superstitious. There was no champagne, because if he bought it, it kind of cursed it. So there was no champagne in the dressing room. There was no, wild celebrations. It was just a kind of low-key celebration.
It probably spoiled my image and complimented them after a game, which was very unusual because no matter what they gave me, I was always trying to get more out of them. And to be realistic, it was a fantastic performance.
There is Jim McLean, having been near honours so often. This is United's first major win in their long history.
Once you get that initial victory under your belt, that gives you a lot of confidence. It gives you a big boost, and then everybody else, all the other clubs come along and go, well, yeah, they're capable of winning something now. And that's what it was. It was proved that you could go on and take it from there and then build on it,
This was Jim McLean's first prize as player or manager, but he recognised there were others who'd waited even longer for success.
The chairman at that time was Ernie Robertson, one of the most important people in Tannadice. Tears were in his eyes, and he said, Jim, He says, I never thought we'd live to see this day. And to me, that was worth more than money or anything, to see the fulfilment of a dream for someone who really deserved it.
United celebrated their success in the traditional manner. But back at Pittodrie, Aberdeen manager Alex Ferguson had to lift himself and his players following another big match disappointment.
Here were we thinking we were the new kids in the block, or trying to become the new kids in the block, as it were. And here were Dundee United beating us in a cup final, you know, so that was sore, particularly for Fergie.
That was a real bitter blow, that one, because I can remember getting on the team bus to go back to Pittodrie and Alec was just sitting looking out the window. He was bitterly disappointed about that one, the way that turned out. It was the same again. We were nearly getting there, and it was this frustration that convincing the players that you could go a bit further, and but that was a big disappointment.
There wasn't much Christmas cheer around Pittodrie in December 1979. Aberdeen had lost the cup final and were lying 5th in the league. How could Ferguson transform these players from cup losers to title winners by May? In their first free election, Zimbabweans overwhelmingly elected Robert Mugabe as their new president.
And now once again we're going over to ITN in London.
In London, the 5-day siege of the Iranian embassy ended when the SAS stormed the building on live television. While Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev sent troops to Afghanistan to support the government against Islamic fundamentalists. Sound familiar? And in Aberdeen, following the crushing disappointment of defeat in the League Cup final, Alex Ferguson summoned his players into Pittodrie.
We'd lost the League Cup final and I replayed to Dundee United, and I came in the next morning and I says, that's the last final we ever was at this club.
I don't know that we did. In my time here, we had 3 consecutive Scottish Cup finals and won them all. So, yeah, it was probably right.
It's in the nature of my record as a manager. I never start well. I always take time because I always want to build my own club.
To be beaten by Dundee United was a sore one, and yeah, did sort of refocus our efforts and remind us that we still had a long way to go before we were going to be the team that could really challenge the Old Firm.
It wasn't all bad news for Aberdeen. To celebrate the new year of 1980, Alex Ferguson took them to the seaside. Unfortunately, it was the North Seaside, as the boss hammered home his message of the mental toughness they'd need for the battles that lay ahead in Glasgow. But there was a ray of sunshine among the Arctic blizzards. Hibernian unveiled their new signing, arguably the best player in the world, a decade earlier.
People don't understand how young he was. It wasn't as if he was 36 or 37 or anything like that, you know. He was really quite young. It's just he was a well-lived-in young.
He was starting to put on weight, so he was less interested in the boutiques. He'd focused down now into the birds and the bevy. And so Edinburgh actually felt like a good place.
I couldn't believe that such a brilliant player would sign for Hibs. Nothing against Hibs, but it seemed to me far too ambitious.
Ambitious, perhaps, but offer a $2,000 a week pay packet to a star on the wane, and just about anything is possible. George Best signed on at Easter Road.
It was massive news. I worked for the Sunday Mirror at the time, a paper published in London and Manchester, and it was the back page lead. Now, this was very unusual for Scottish football to get that in the national paper. It transcended anything beyond the borders of Scotland.
A word begins to enter the vocabulary of Scottish football, which is something we now take for granted, where people started to say, it's entertainment. Football is part of the entertainment industry.
I went to Easter Road to do a commentary, and he was just immense. Huge crowds turned out just to have a look at him.
I remember seeing George Best playing for Hibs at Rugby Park. It was the only time I saw him when he was... And it was, no offence to the Hibs players, but it did seem to me like sort of Michelangelo being helped by guys who paint by numbers.
In the end, though, Best couldn't save Hibs from relegation, but he showed that despite the years of wild living, there was still a great player hidden beneath the tight-fitting Hibs shirt.
Tries it in right-footed, it's a goal! Beautiful goal by Best, superbly taken.
Back in the days of 2 points for a win, that draw at Easter Road put Celtic 10 points clear of Aberdeen, who'd played 3 games fewer than the league leaders. But the weather in the northeast was about to take a turn for the worse, and in the early months of 1980, Aberdeen were lucky just to get a game. The big freeze meant that Aberdeen were facing a serious fixture pile-up.
I do remember the sort of postponements and watching other results coming in the old-fashioned style, as it were, in the teleprinter, and not being able to play and seeing Celtic getting further ahead of us, and ending up with those games in hand. So that was frustrating because we felt we were playing well and we wanted to keep playing.
But even in mid-March, as Ferguson's men trailed Celtic by 11 points, Aberdeen lay under almost a foot of snow, and there was next to no chance of fulfilling that Saturday's fixture against Morton. But the manager was absolutely determined to get his players back playing football.
The whole programme's off in Scotland because of the weather. And I get everyone in Saturday morning into Pittodrie, and Quinn, the chairman, who was in his 70s, and Quinn the snow off the pitch to get the game played against Morton. And we managed to get a 1-0 victory out of it. And from then we were on a run. The form was terrific. And I think it was 15 games undefeated.
As the backlog cleared, Aberdeen emerged from their enforced hibernation as the only serious challengers to Celtic.
You're allowed to score, dingus!
But if Aberdeen were going to catch Celtic, then Ferguson's team would have to show they'd understood the message the manager had been hammering into them since the day he arrived at Pittodrie.
Alec Ferguson said to win anything in Scotland, you have to win in Glasgow. And that was what became his absolute motto for that Aberdeen team.
Yes, it's over, it's a goal!
In April, the truth of that motto was to be severely tested. Despite their good run of results, Aberdeen was still 7 points adrift of the league leaders when they went to Celtic Park on April the 5th.
The way he spoke about the old firm, you knew he was gunning for them.
The message that was constantly put to us was that we had to beat the Old Firm. And, it is pretty straightforward. You have to beat the Old Firm, and you have to beat them in Glasgow.
If you don't come down to Celtic Park or Ibrox and get a result on a regular basis, people not take you serious.
60,000 Celtic fans took them seriously enough to turn up for a match that would either end or confirm Aberdeen's title challenge.
He's gone round it well. Jarvy's there with a chance. Oh, a great goal by Jarvy.
It was round 1 to Ferguson in the mind games. The psychology he'd forced-fed his players over the years was paying dividends.
We were starting to develop winners that particular season. Miller, complete winner. McLeish, winners. They were a tremendous backbone to the team. And I think that the winning of the games like Celtic at Celtic Park would brought all the other qualities out in the rest of the players.
Beating Celtic in Glasgow had narrowed the gap at the top of the table to just 5 points, and they'd played a game less. Aberdeen's confidence could not have been higher, and next up, bottom of the table Hibernian. Ferguson had convinced his players that winning the title was possible, but this 1-1 draw left Grampian's news reporter unconvinced.
Hibs did open the scoring in the 64th minute, which ended Aberdeen's championship aspirations.
There was a kind of a feeling after the game that, that result could be very costly at the end of the season. I was really disappointed after the game for 2 reasons, because we'd only drawn, and I thought it was going to be a very costly point drop. And I remember, although huge respect for George Best as a player, and I was hugely disappointed. My memories of him was passing the ball back to the goalkeeper and trying to hold out for a draw. Now, that's not George Best.
As Miller and Best traded blows in the tunnel, the media consensus was that Aberdeen had blown it, and their title challenge was dead. The manager thought it time to introduce his players to the now legendary Alex Ferguson hairdryer.
Oh, come on!
Now, you lambasted them.
You really did, after drawing with Hibs.
I've never done that before. I thought about it and I thought maybe it was time to do something, say something, because they kind of go and letting themselves down the way they did against Hibs. But when you see that the levels we can play at, and if you had us watched that match against Hibs, you know, you would never have believed that we could play so bad.
That drop point wasn't too costly for Alex Ferguson, thanks in part to his co-conspirator in the North East, as in April, Celtic went to Tannadice and lost 3-0.
I can remember Alex said, "You need me, I need you. You need me, I need you." I says, "What the hell do I need you for?" He says, "You need me to beat Rangers and Celtic." He says, "And I need you to beat Rangers and Celtic." And again, he was 100% right.
Desperate to get back to winning ways, Celtic returned to the City of Discovery 10 days later and got off to a perfect start against Dundee.
Aiken working a very nice 1-2 and a chance on a glorious goal. Beautiful goal by Aiken.
But thereafter, their title challenge got hopelessly lost.
Chance with Ferguson and goal. And he makes it 2-1. Fleming, what's a goal? They're getting it into the box. Ferguson, the shot, it's a goal. Sinclair makes it 4-1. Sinclair coming through, rounding Latchford, chips it out in front. It's in the net, it's a goal. The referee is giving a goal. It's 5-1.
That thumping by Dundee was Celtic's third defeat in 4 matches, and their once unassailable lead in the title race was disintegrating almost daily. While Celtic were imploding on Tayside, Aberdeen were in Ayrshire to face Kilmarnock.
Steve Archibald makes it 3-1.
Those results left Aberdeen just 2 points behind Celtic, but with a game in hand and a better goal difference.
We were going to Kilmarnock the previous Saturday, I think it was, and we beat Kilmarnock down there 3-1. And Celtic was to Dundee 5-1 at Dundee Park, and that opened the door for us. Because we knew then going to Celtic Park on the Wednesday, if we won, we're joint top of the league.
On April 23rd, 1980, all eyes were on Celtic Park for a match that was being billed as a title decider. Early in 1980, STV launched their brand new soap opera, Take the High Road. Paul McCartney's decision to take the high road ended with him seeing in the early weeks of the new year through the bars of a Japanese prison cell, while the world waited and wondered and bet on who it was that shot JR. In Scotland, the bookies had declared the race for the Scottish Premier Division as too close to call. The earlier odds-on favourite Celtic had seen their lead over Aberdeen reduced from 11 points to just 2, and Aberdeen had played a game less. On April 23rd, Aberdeen went to Celtic Park for what was being billed as a title decider. Surely they couldn't go to Celtic Park twice in a fortnight and win.
I couldn't understand the logic either, that because it was 2 games in Glasgow within a fortnight, that somehow you couldn't win both the games. But that was the logic at the time, and that was the general perception that it was impossible.
The old Celtic Park was full to bursting that evening. The fans recognised the importance of that fixture too.
They pulled the game back about 35 minutes because of the crowds. And but the atmosphere, the temperament of the players was terrific, because knowing it was a sort of a wee decider and the game being delayed, a lot of players would have got agitated, they got a bit nervous, but the temperament of the team was terrific. They couldn't wait to get on that pitch. They were never going to lose that game.
I spoke to Roy Aitken about those times afterwards, and I remember him saying to me that when the Celtic team looked at us in the tunnel, he said we were convinced that we were all on drugs. He says because they were just like a madness in everyone's eyes, and there was that sort of manic kind of determination that Alec had instilled in us to go and win those games.
Knocked in by Scanlon, Archibald had a chance and it scores.
Always remember being, really positive and not showing any fear. And in fact, going the opposite and showing a bit of arrogance and maybe taking a little chance or two at the back, just to kind of stamp your authority on the game.
Kennedy's onside. This is danger for Celtic. Kennedy across. What a chance for McGee. And a goal!
We're here to win this game. We're here because we believe we're better than you. Don't think that you were like the rest of the teams that come to play you and that we're going to lie down.
Here's a cross, aim for Archibald. Latchford drops it, Strachan scores. Strachan makes it 3-1. Disaster for Peter.
We knew then that we'd really put the heat on them, and we felt unstoppable. We felt we could go at the end of the season unbeaten.
By the final weekend of the season, Aberdeen had gone 13 games undefeated, but Celtic still topped the league by a single point, although Aberdeen had a game in hand and superior goal difference. It meant that Celtic had to beat St Mirren at Love Street to have any chance of retaining their title. If St Mirren took even 1 point from Celtic and Aberdeen beat Hibs, Ferguson's men would be crowned champions. The Aberdeen fans sensed history was being made and headed to the capital in their thousands.
I can remember coming along London Road in Edinburgh, and there was people sitting there with red scarves on, hats on, and it was like an army camp there waiting on something, and the bus went along, and I can remember them saying, we don't want to disappoint these people, we're here to get a result.
We turned up on the day full of confidence and gave one of the most powerful performances you'll ever see from a team.
Oh, that's a goal!
Steve Archibald put Aberdeen in front, and 60 seconds later, the match was all but won.
It comes loose. That's a goal by Watson.
With a young midfield player, a local boy, Andy Watson, his first 25 minutes of the game was marvellous. He kept running through, his energy was incredible, and he got the second goal for us, and that just settled us.
It may have settled the team, but it did little for the manager's composure.
The manager, I'm told, went banging the referee's door, shouting and bawling about some perceived injustices, creating all manner of mayhem.
I get sent to the stand. Brian McGill was the referee, and I slaughtered him at half time, and he sent me to the stand.
I think he was just trying to keep it boiling, keep the whole thing going. He didn't want anything to go flat, because a lot of times what you can, that you can be winning a game, at half time could be the worst thing that can happen to you.
Aberdeen were cruising and scored 3 more second-half goals. But their success still all depended on Celtic's result at Love Street.
The Celtic game and how Celtic are getting on, forget about that. That'll take care of itself afterwards. Go out and beat Hibs. And that's what we tried to do, but it was impossible because we're getting a running commentary for Bobby Clark behind me and how Celtic were doing at Paisley.
The game was won, but ironically, it was St Mirren, the club that sacked him 2 years earlier, that stood between Ferguson and the fulfilment of a life's ambition.
So we're standing on the pitch and didn't know really if we'd won the league or not. And then eventually we got the message down from the press box and they drew 0-0. We'd won the league, and it was fantastic.
And that's it! They have won! Alec Ferguson is on now in the penalty area. There he's in. Can you blame the man for going out of his mind temporarily?
And there was like a kind of dizziness come over me anyway, that I was out there and almost a kind of mushroom sort of my own, kind of like a wee bit bewildered, because it dawned on me what had happened. It was just an amazing feeling.
In that moment, all of Ferguson's previous disappointments of being sacked by St Mirren and the League Cup final defeat of earlier in the season were finally forgotten. He'd become the one thing he'd longed for all his life, a winner.
One of the things that he wanted to do was have that experience of being a winner. And, having been a player and not won would have, grated him. And I think, therefore, he saw the management side as being an opportunity to put that right.
At some stage he addressed the Aberdeen travelling support over the loudspeaker at Easter Road, and carried away by the occasion told them that he loved them all and they were welcome to come to his house that night. And at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning he was still up sitting with his brother Martin chewing the fat over it all when the doorbell rang and 2 fans appeared and he invited them in. And they sat and had a drink, and he says he doesn't know who they were or are to this day.
It's hard to quantify the enormous effect that the first league win had, not only on the club but on the city. Aberdeen was buzzing. Suddenly, they were no longer also-rans. Suddenly, they were the league champions, better than any other side in the Premier League. And they had a manager whom they absolutely adored.
For Aberdeen, the season was over. They had the summer to bask in their triumph and concentrate on their debut in the European Cup. Celtic had to pick themselves up for the Scottish Cup final the following week. This wasn't just any cup final. This was an Old Firm Cup final. In fact, this really wasn't just any Old Firm Cup final.
The 1980 Cup final, you could actually write a PhD thesis on this 90 minutes alone. I mean, it's got everything there going for it. The declining kind of institutions of Rangers and Celtic, this epic big kind of sectarian struggle between green and blue.
So off we go.
By kick-off on May 10th, 1980, the balance of power in Scottish football had moved to the northeast, and the Old Firm were left to battle it out for the remaining silverware. An uneventful and largely forgettable match plodded into extra time and was finally won by Celtic.
Tom Forsyth, still not clear. Danny McGrain. Oh, that's a goal! 1-0 for Celtic.
The outstanding memory of the match was it was a terrible match. It was an awful match, and it was won by an awful goal.
And there goes the final whistle. Celtic have won the Scottish Cup for the 26th time. There is. The Scottish Cup goes to Parkhead.
The Celtic team went down to the Celtic supporters, and some came on after them as they went back to the centre circle.
And there's an invasion of Celtic supporters.
Well, this was an invitation for the Rangers supporters to come on from the other end, and eventually there were thousands with bottles being thrown back and forward.
And of course, there was the absolute kind of humiliation of Scottish football. This was Scotland in its sectarian worst.
I'm not going to hide my feelings about this. This is ridiculous that this should have happened in the Scottish Cup final.
For the first time, I found myself released from the bondage of being very careful about what you said and wading into the history of sectarianism and so on.
At the end of the day, let's not kid ourselves. These supporters hate each other.
You were talking about things that were almost taboo.
And this is now like a scene out of Apocalypse Now.
It was almost like a tantrum, an Old Firm tantrum, having been displaced by these other teams.
This is possibly the worst incident I have seen in the football field in 25 years of world travels.
It was like the last skirmishes of the 30 Years' War that we were still fighting in Scotland. It was very, very sad.
The entire park was covered with bodies and horses and, police and all that kind of thing. For a match that wasn't worth rioting over, I suppose a lot of journalists were saved that day by the riot. We could give them something to write about.
And write about it they did. Stories and images of the Hampden riot went global. The shame of tribal violence and sectarianism was exposed, and the whole world witnessed it. The media urged Rangers to end their sectarian signing policy, and the government brought in a total ban on the purchase or consumption of alcohol in all Scottish sports stadia.
The fans of Celtic and Rangers now recognise that the championships and the cup competitions was not all about them. It was about teams on the other side of the country.
Aberdonians, and with some degree of purpose and right on their side, have absolute contempt for Glasgow. There is a side of Aberdonians who, let's be absolutely honest about this, feel so superior to Glasgow that you could measure it by the yard. And I bet you a lot of them are watching telly saying, there you go, that's what they're really like.
Mills with a great shot, oh what a goal! His first track and opening goal!
The 1979-80 season was the start of a truly remarkable era in Scottish football.
Stunnock done it again!
Everyone sat up and took notice because the Dundee United side were battling against the big boys in Central Scotland.
Fleming is inside, that's very good at it!
And that's what happened. But it was healthy and it was serious.
Brilliant goal by Gordon Strachan.
Under Alex Ferguson, Aberdeen would go on to win 2 more league titles, 4 Scottish Cups, and unforgettably in 1983, the European Cup Winners' Cup.
I think for Scottish football it was good, it was refreshing. It lifted the game because it got away from the monotony of Rangers and Celtic constantly dominating Scottish football.
Dundee United retained their League Cup the following year and would win the League Championship 2 years later.
Absolutely unbelievable.
But you had this feeling, always the case, that the monster wasn't quite dead, and that thing in the beating heart of that world they call Glasgow, that somebody hadn't put the stake through its heart quite enough.